He says he doesn't want anything serious. You feel the connection, you notice the signs, yet his words form an invisible barrier, and still he doesn't pull away. On the contrary, he's always around, present enough to stir your hopes, yet distant enough to leave everything undefined. This unstable dynamic triggers a psychological game far deeper than it seems, a game in which the unconscious speaks louder than conscious intentions. What do you do when he says he doesn't want commitment, but something inside you believes there's more behind those words? In this video, we'll reveal a powerful, subtle psychological path that awakens the drive for connection, even in someone who insists they want nothing serious. A method that activates deep archetypes and transforms the dynamic between you. If you believe you deserve more, comment, "I'm ready to be truly chosen." When someone declares they don't want anything serious, it may be an honest expression of their conscious state. Yet, according to Jung, the unconscious almost always tells a parallel story. In analytical psychology, a relationship is not merely an encounter between two people, but an exchange of unconscious contents that shape desires, fears, and behaviors. In this context, understanding how archetypes influence affective dynamics becomes a powerful key. The anima archetype, for example, represents the feminine principle in a man's psyche. When a woman awakens this aspect in him, not by forcing or demanding, but simply by being herself with depth and authenticity, she provokes an inner movement that challenges his conscious refusal of commitment. He doesn't chase her because she pressures him, but because she reflects something he has lost or has yet to integrate. His desire to pursue her is born of an unconscious attempt to reclaim that part of himself. Meanwhile, the concept of projection explains why we often idealize the other, or are idealized. He may project onto you a figure of freedom, adventure, or even a threat to his autonomy, depending on his own unconscious content. When you stand your ground with confidence and clarity, without clinging to the need to be chosen, you break the projection cycle and activate the process of individuation, the building of an authentic identity. The secret isn't convincing him to change his mind, but becoming so whole, so connected with your own essence, that he can't ignore the call it awakens in him. That's how the shadow begins to integrate, and the game shifts from conquest to mirroring and transformation. When a man says he doesn't want anything serious, the most common interpretation is that he's simply being honest about his life stage, his freedom, or his priorities. However, from a Jungian perspective, such a statement often functions less as rational truth and more as an unconscious defense against unacknowledged internal forces. His refusal of commitment may hide a profound conflict with his own unconscious, especially with the aspects represented by the anima, his inner feminine, emotional, intuitive, and relational. In today's culture, many men are raised to develop only their persona, the social mask that shows strength, autonomy, and independence. Anything that threatens this image, like the emotional vulnerability a deep relationship requires, is rejected, even if that means sacrificing authentic connections. Commitment becomes seen not as a choice, but as a loss of control. Here, the illusion of choice takes hold. He believes he's choosing not to get involved, when in fact he's being driven by unconscious fears. The fear of giving oneself usually ties back to a negative projection of the anima. Jung describes that when a man projects repressed aspects of his inner feminine onto a woman, he doesn't see her as she is, but as a figure laden with expectations, dangers, or idealized fascination. This creates tension. He feels attracted yet threatened, for she represents something in himself he doesn't understand. Approaching her feels like approaching his own vulnerability. Distancing himself feels like protecting his persona. This mechanism intensifies when the woman, unwittingly, responds with insecurity or a need for validation. That's when the chase and run dynamic takes over. He withdraws to preserve his freedom, while she strives to rationally win him over. But the more she tries to conquer him with logic, the more he defends himself emotionally. The path to transformation begins when she understands that the real battle isn't against him, but against the unconscious games this relationship has activated. This requires an internal repositioning. Instead of trying to be chosen, become the natural choice, not through words, but through presence. When a woman stops fighting for space in his life and fully occupies her own inner space, she breaks the projection cycle. She ceases to mirror his insecurities and becomes a reflection of his most intact self. This stance activates something powerful in the male unconscious. He begins to sense that he's facing someone who doesn't seek confirmation, but who embodies an existential challenge, someone who doesn't need him to feel complete, yet confronts him with all that he's yet to access within himself. This deep attraction arises because it awakens his own process of individuation. Thus, his running from commitment isn't about you. It's about him not yet being ready for the self-knowledge journey that a true relationship requires. But by becoming a symbol of that journey, through your own emotional maturity and integrity, you activate a kind of desire that can't be ignored, a desire born not from lack, but from unconscious admiration for someone who has become whole. A man who flees commitment is often fleeing his own transformation, but no one can run forever from what they're meant to integrate. And when he meets someone who represents not just a relationship, but a mirror of his repressed wholeness, he has no choice but to move closer, not by force, but by resonance. According to Jung, the anima archetype represents the psychic feminine in the structure of a man's unconscious. It's through her that he connects with feelings, intuition, sensitivity, and the impulse to relate. When a woman awakens this archetype in him, she isn't merely attracting his attention, she's activating an internal movement toward wholeness. But for this to happen genuinely, without manipulation or dependence, she herself must be in touch with her own feminine essence in a deep and authentic state. Activating the anima isn't a traditional seduction game. It doesn't involve tricks, tests, or gimmicks. It involves presence. The woman attuned to her own psyche, who understands her shadows, honors her cycles, and doesn't fear silence or the other's space, communicates something far more powerful than words can convey. She becomes a symbolic figure, a gateway through which the other can encounter dormant parts of himself. This activation begins when she stops trying to convince anyone of her worth. Instead, she incarnates it. She knows herself so well that she doesn't need to be chosen. She has already chosen herself. This stance triggers what Jung calls symbolic resonance. The man perceives that he's facing something different, something that moves not by need, but by abundance. This creates a magnetic field in which he's drawn in without fully understanding why. Often, when a woman tries to persuade a man to want something serious, she's unconsciously acting from a state of lack, hoping he'll recognize in her the worth she hasn't yet consolidated within. This blocks anima activation, for the wounded feminine seeks external validation that only internal integration can provide. Conversely, the woman who awakens the anima without pressure is one who sustains mystery, not mystery as manipulation, but as depth. She doesn't reveal everything at once, not because she's playing games, but because she's whole. She doesn't need to be deciphered, for she isn't a puzzle. She's a universe expanding. This stance invites the man into his own inner journey, because encountering someone who neither chases nor rejects him, but simply is, he begins to wonder what he's missing by not diving deeper. Thus, this woman doesn't try to take the place of his anima. She simply embodies the conscious feminine, and that moves him. The unconscious always seeks what consciousness lacks. If he's trapped in a persona of freedom and detachment, upon meeting someone who expresses emotional depth and freedom, he'll be naturally attracted. And the more she holds this position without demanding, the more he feels compelled to move toward her, not as a game, but as a calling. It's crucial to remember that activating the anima isn't synonymous with pleasing. It isn't about being perfect, sweet all the time, or unconditionally available. On the contrary, the deep feminine establishes clear boundaries, honors her own needs, and withdraws when there's no reciprocity. This strength resonates in a man's unconscious as an echo, something that confronts him with his emotional immaturity, and if he's ready, propels him to grow. The drive to pursue then doesn't come from her absence, but from her wholeness. He begins to feel that by not approaching, he's missing the chance to access something beyond the relationship, the chance to find himself through her. Awakening the anima isn't a conscious task, but by cultivating her own depth, a woman becomes the reflection of what's most unconscious and therefore irresistible. She doesn't need to chase. She only needs to sustain the truth of who she is. And thus, without pressure or manipulation, she becomes the mirror of what he hasn't dared to be, and so he will follow her. True authenticity is often mistaken for saying everything you think or being transparent all the time. But in Jungian terms, true authenticity demands a much deeper dive, the integration of the shadow. The shadow, as defined by Jung, is the set of repressed aspects of personality, everything we reject in ourselves and thus relegate to the unconscious. When unacknowledged, The shadow manifests through destructive patterns, self-sabotage, and emotional dependency, but when integrated, it transforms into the most powerful source of personal magnetism. One of the greatest barriers preventing a woman from becoming truly magnetic is the denial of her own anger, pain, insecurity, or need. She believes she will only be loved if she's always positive, understanding, and emotionally stable. By repressing these parts, she creates a false persona, a polished mask that never touches anyone's soul. Nobody falls in love with a mask. We fall in love with the truth we recognize in another, even if it comes with imperfections. Integrating the shadow means acknowledging fear, jealousy, insecurity, or desire for control, but not letting these aspects dominate your life. They need to be seen, welcomed, and transmuted. When a woman recognizes her contradictions without shame, she becomes whole. And that wholeness radiates a silent, authentic force that attracts deeply. She no longer seeks validation outside because she's already reconciled within. And that changes everything. A man who says he doesn't want anything serious is often used to interactions where he feels emotionally in control. But when he meets a woman who knows her own shadow and doesn't falter in expressing her boundaries, desires, and vulnerabilities, he disarms. Because she's not trying to be loved, she's being herself. And that presence is challenging. He can't manipulate her or predict her reactions based on old games. He senses he's faced with something new, someone who doesn't need him, yet consciously chooses him, and who can walk away if there's no mutuality. This kind of woman doesn't engage in emotional battles or lose herself trying to please. She knows how to recognize when she's being pulled into the savior, caregiver, or woman who will make him change role, and refuses these traps of the collective unconscious. She doesn't get involved to fix, but to share, and that is rare, that is irresistible. Shadow integration also gives her the power to withdraw without drama when she senses there's no real space to grow in that relationship. Rather than insisting, she retreats with dignity because she isn't tied to the illusion that she must prove her worth. And this conscious withdrawal can paradoxically become the greatest driver of attraction for him, because she demonstrates through action that she won't lose herself trying to hold on to someone who isn't ready. Magnetic authenticity arises when there's no longer any fear of being rejected for being imperfect, when there's no need to hide pain in order to appear strong. When a woman can say, "Yes, I have light and shadow, and I am still worthy of love," this stance cannot be feigned. It is felt, and it touches a man's unconscious because it reveals the courage he himself hasn't yet summoned. By living this authenticity, she activates in him the impulse to approach, not out of lack or superficial desire, but from an internal call, because every man, consciously or not, seeks what helps him integrate his own denied parts. And a woman who has already walked that path in herself becomes the perfect mirror for his journey. It's not about perfection, but about depth. Whoever integrates their shadow becomes true, and the true always attracts. There is a silent, profound force in the feminine that transcends seduction, conquest, or attention-seeking. It is the energy of the integrated feminine, a psychic state in which a woman no longer acts from need, but from wholeness. Jung understood the feminine not merely as a gender, but as a function of the soul, receptive, intuitive, creative, connected with life's mystery. When this energy is fragmented, a woman becomes reactive, anxious, and dependent. But when it's integrated, she attracts effortlessly, awakening in the other not only desire but reverence. This integration happens when a woman reconciles her internal polarities, light and shadow, strength and vulnerability, rationality and intuition. She stops dividing herself between the woman who wants to be chosen and the woman who fears asserting herself. She begins to occupy her place with firmness, without justification. Her energy shifts. It is no longer centered on what the other wants, thinks, or feels, but on what is true for her. And this, paradoxically, is what makes her most desirable. The conscious masculine, one who is available to relate deeply, only responds to the energy of a woman who has already found herself. He isn't attracted by games or by a figure seeking completion, but by a presence that invites him to expand. When a woman lives in this state, she doesn't need to chase. She becomes a magnetic field that naturally selects those in resonance with her highest vibration. This integrated feminine presence is perceived in every gesture, every glance, every silence. She doesn't need to explain herself or beg for attention. She positions herself with clarity, communicates what she desires without fear of loss, because she knows that what is true never demands sacrifice of one's own dignity. And it's this stance that calls the masculine to consciousness. He realizes that, to remain by her side, he will need to abandon superficiality and dive into his own maturation process. Such a woman does not fear loneliness because she has made peace with it. She won't settle for emotional crumbs because she's learned to nourish herself from within. She won't negotiate her essence because she knows the most important relationship is the one she has with herself. This force is silent yet transformative. It's not about domination but about presence. The return of the conscious masculine happens when a man interacting with this woman starts to realize that he's not facing another game, but a mirror. A mirror that shows what he could become if he's willing to grow. And here it's not about convincing him to change, but allowing his own internal transformation to invite him to do so, if he's ready. This effortless attraction isn't passive. It's active in silence, in firm boundaries, in a tenderly spoken no, in withdrawal without guilt, in a yes born of choice, not lack. A woman who embodies this energy doesn't cling to promises, nor waits for someone to save her from emptiness. She has already become the source, and that's why she's rare and why she's so magnetic. This kind of presence transcends the question of, will he choose me, or does he want something serious? It changes the question. It's no longer, will he choose me, but is he ready to walk beside someone who doesn't need him, yet consciously desires him? And if the answer is no, she moves on, whole, serene, powerful. And often, upon realizing he cannot control or manipulate her, the unconscious masculine retreats, but the conscious one returns, because he recognizes that before him lies more than a romance, the chance to become who he was meant to be. Whenever someone says they don't want anything serious, the tendency is to believe the problem lies within us, our appearance, our behavior, our timing, or our intensity. But when we look beneath the surface and understand the unconscious movements that govern effective bonds, we see that real desire for connection only arises in the presence of truth. It's not about being irresistibly attractive on the outside, but about being whole on the inside. Throughout this video, we've seen how Jungian psychology's principles reveal that true power of attraction lies not in effort, but in depth. When a woman accesses her own shadow, activates the anima in the other without manipulation, and sustains the energy of the integrated feminine, she becomes a call to transformation, not only for him, but above all, for herself. And that is the most magnetic beauty there is, staying true to yourself, even if it means walking alone for a while. If this content spoke to you, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Now click on the video playing on your screen. It's the perfect continuation of this journey of self-knowledge and conscious relationships. Your transformation begins the moment you choose not to diminish yourself in order to be loved.